One atmosphere living underwater. What is it? Why is it important? And why are we talking about it? Find out now.
Welcome to Colonize the Ocean podcast, where we discuss oceanic colonization, exploration, and education with your hosts Adam Jewell and Brendan Traxler.
So when we talk about one atmosphere, what exactly are we talking about? I think that most of the people who are listening to this are familiar enough with the ocean and all that to understand that every 33 feet or 10 meters is one atmosphere of pressure. And at that point in time, your dive tables begin to change as far as how long you have to take coming back up to the surface for decompression because of the nitrogen in your bloodstream. And that's a whole other podcast in and of itself, the science of scuba diving. But when we're looking at underwater habitats, you have to look at it different because even though you're not scuba diving at the time, you're still at that level in what's called an ambient pressure habitat. So all the underwater habitats to this point in time have been ambient pressure, meaning that the internal pressure equals what's outside. So if a underwater habitat is at 60 feet, that's 2 atmospheres plus, then the inside pressure is equal to that. So that messes with your dive tables. Aquarius is at 66 feet, I think it is, 63 feet. And so after about 45 minutes of being down there, your dive tables drastically start changing. And if you're down there for long enough, it may take days or longer to decompress to come up. Now, I understand I'm rushing through a lot of this here, but in this week's live stream that we did on Patreon, we actually dive deeper into this and talk about this a lot more. That audio podcast will be going out the day after this is coming out. So you're probably listening to it. It's out as well. I encourage you to go listen to that as Adam, Babe, and I really talk about why having a one atmosphere habitat is important. And really the down and dirty of it is for humanity to be able to make that seamless transition to the oceans, especially living under them. You have to have that one atmosphere, that surface level atmosphere for ease of coming and going, and just a whole slew of other reasons that you're going to run into at depth. Obviously, the key one is that if there's an emergency and you're, pressurized to 2 atmospheres, so, and you've been down there for a week, you're not going to be able to come right to the surface and get tended to without needs of a hyperbaric chamber or other means. So, if we're able to keep your living environment, your working environment at the same pressure that you are at the surface, then coming and going isn't a big deal. But then the question ends up being, how do you come and go? Again, we discuss a lot of that, but elevators are one aspect, docking collars, a lockout system, so you could scuba dive up, which becomes a little bit more complicated, but I think will be one way that a lot of habitats will end up using in the future, especially if you're wanting any kind of scientific experimentation going on, or just, you want to have that flexibility. Bottom line, what we all came to concurrence on is that the technology exists. It's been in place in different ways, and just pulling it all together into one environment, one habitat, and making it happen. I think part of the reason it hasn't happened to now is it hasn't needed to. Everybody's been okay with a scientific research underwater habitat that you scuba dive down to, you pressurize to whatever your depth you're at, and you deal with it, and then you come out. That's not going to fly for the future. My grandmother is not going to want to come down underwater and have to wait a day or two to come back up to the surface after the fact. Kids aren't going to want to do that. It separates off the vast majority of the world from experiencing the ocean, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. Our goal is to open up the oceans to as many people as possible, and for work and for play. So, what's your thoughts on the whole thing? I like to leave these shorts here with a question or a thinking type of thing, and we discuss a lot of this, but I'll leave it at two. First off, how would you make that transition? Would you use an elevator? Would you use a lockout system? Would you use some kind of submersible with a docking system? What other ways have we maybe not thought about that you might use? And really, I think I'm just going to leave you with that one question. I think that's a deep enough question instead of throwing too much at you today. So comment on our social media, shoot us a message, whatever you like to do. Check out the podcast that's coming out. And if you want the visual aspect, watch us on YouTube or any of the other social media platforms.